My name is Eleanor Lang, and I'm 31 years old. My husband was a billionaire. He never cheated. He never raised his voice. He never let me want for a single thing. Everyone told me I was insane to ask for a divorce. But a marriage doesn't always die from betrayal. Sometimes it dies quietly, in 1,000 small moments where your name gets moved to the line marked unnecessary. I understood that at 5:42 in the morning, the moment I realized I was nothing more than the most expensive piece of furniture in my own house. But for you to understand how a woman who had everything could lose herself completely, I have to take you back to the beginning, to a cold autumn night in a Chelsea gallery, back when I was still the naive wife who believed her husband was coming. The Chelsea gallery hummed with people, crystal flutes chiming beneath a low current of jazz. A single spotlight fell on the enormous oil painting at the center of the room, the one I'd titled Times 5:42 a.m. It was the blue hour I'd watched with Theodore Vance Theo, as everyone in finance called him on a Hamptons beach during our brief honeymoon 3 years earlier. To capture that hushed, unreal shade of ultramarine, I had burned through 2 tubes of precious lapis lazuli. Chair Morgan, head of Columbia's art department, drifted over, scanning the room. "Eleanor, you keep watching the door." "Still waiting on a VIP?" Colleagues traded glances and murmured, "She's waiting for the mystery man." Word is she's finally introducing family tonight. The show's about to close. Where is he? A Wall Street CEO can't spare 1 hour? Can't be much of a marriage. That crowd never is. I gripped my phone until my fingertips went white. It wasn't that I needed Theo there. It was that a week earlier, at the Vance estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, his younger sister Thea, a student in my painting seminar, had mentioned the opening in passing. Theo had brushed the corner of Thea's invitation, studying it. When his eyes landed on the thumbnail of Times 5:42 a.m. Times on the cover, he said, out of nowhere, "Leave one for me. I've got a board meeting near Chelsea Wednesday. I'll swing by." The last time we'd appeared together in public was a charity benefit 2 years ago. For one word, swing by, I overruled the curator and moved this achingly private painting to the center of the floor, then made the lighting tech reset the angle a dozen times so that when the glow fell across Theo's suit, it would match the dawn inside the frame. But the glass doors kept sliding open and letting in nothing but the raw cold of a New York autumn. The entrance that had buzzed all evening went quiet, only the staff clearing the empty glasses. My screen lit up, but then went dark. No text. No missed call. And suddenly the blue in that painting looked mixed too cold. But I had no idea that the night he didn't come was only the first crack, and the person who would pry it wide open was me. By dawn, the penthouse on the Upper East Side was still lit. Theo leaned back in the Chesterfield, amber eyes fixed on an S1 filing. Vance Holdings was taking its media and entertainment arm public, and he barely slept anymore. At the sound of my heels, he glanced up. "You're home." "Yes." I shrugged off my trench coat, too drained to ask why he'd stood me up, or why he never answered my text. The show had ended hours ago. On my way out, I watched a colleague's husband sprint a full mile to find her when she'd shut off her phone in a temper, then drape his coat over her shoulders, laughing with relief. So I said yes to drinks in the meatpacking district because I stubbornly wanted to know what it felt like to be searched for like that. I told myself, he's buried under billion-dollar deals. He can forget to call back. But late at night, in a penthouse suddenly missing a living person, surely he would notice. For all 3 hours, my phone stayed silent as a grave. I came home, showered, turned off the lamp, and lay with my back to him. The mattress dipped, carrying a thread of cool air from his study. Theo took off his glasses. "Did the show go well?" My spine went rigid. In the dark, I didn't turn around. well enough. It was true glowing reviews, every important collector there, the painting, the talk of the art press. The only regret was that its subject never showed up to see himself. Behind me came a rustle, and a warm hand tucked the blanket over my shoulder. Good then. His voice carried the exhaustion of a man wrung dry on Wall Street. He explained it cleanly. The meeting with the underwriters overran, and I had to cut a few of the non-essential items. Non-essential. So all the care I'd poured into that night lived in his assistant Marcus's leather planner under the heading non-essential, a line to be crossed out with a single stroke. He paused. Ellie, if you're upset, I understand. I'm not upset. I cut him off. 3 years in, I'd finally understood. I wasn't the kind of wife entitled to sulk. My eyes stung. I pressed my face into the blanket. Theo seemed satisfied with how quickly the negotiation had closed. All right. Get some sleep. I've an early press call. He turned away, his breathing sliding into an even rhythm. I thought this was just another night of swallowing it whole. What I didn't see was that soon he himself would sever the last thread of this strategic marriage. From the first day we met, introduced through the quiet machinery of the old money East Coast, Theo carried this same austere, distant air. In a circle full of trust fund playboys, he was clean and sharp to the point of not fitting in. Ours was a strategic marriage, sealed with a prenup hundreds of pages long, ruthless in its precision. Theo was exactly what our world coveted. No scandals, a brilliant career, a company on the verge of going public. At first, I thought I was lucky we executed the contract perfectly, treating each other with the courtesy of honored guests. Then my friends started getting married. Watching the messy, living love in their homes, I realized Theo and I were too polite in a way that didn't resemble marriage at all. Because Vance Holdings was in the delicate stretch before filing its S-1 with the SEC, the board demanded absolute privacy around the CEO's personal life. Our wedding took place quietly, in an old chapel outside the city, a secret marriage in all but name. Once, I confessed my loneliness to my closest friend. She sipped her martini. Ellie, do you know how many models would kill for the seat you're sitting in? He's got $1 billion, he doesn't chase, and he bankrolled your glass studio. Marry a capitalist built to make money, and you don't get to demand romance too. By the time I heard that advice, it was too late. Somewhere along the way, I'd started scanning Bloomberg for his face, spending hours in the studio sketching the back of him. 5:42 a.m. Times wasn't just a painting. It was one time I broke the rules on purpose, hiding a secret love inside light and pigment. The trouble is, in a marriage priced this precisely, the greedy one who breaks the rules pays with her whole heart. When I woke, Theo had left for Teterboro. For a week I didn't see him. I learned he'd flown to Europe from a CNBC segment, the way I'd always reassembled his life from the news. The moment I got to campus, Chair Morgan called me in. The Vance Foundation had launched an enormous corporate social responsibility program, a grant fund for young artists. Ellie, CEO Vance is spearheading this himself, he said, handing me the proposal. You'd be perfect as the department's face working directly with Vance Holdings. Looking at the gold-embossed V on the cover, all I felt was the folder burning my hand. I didn't want to meet him in an office as a business partner. Sir, I'm swamped prepping for the new semester. Let Sarah take it. That weekend, Theo came home from London worn thin. As he worked his cufflinks loose, he mentioned it offhand. I'm meeting your dean this afternoon. Signing the CSR contract. I was sketching on the sofa. My pen stopped. Oh. It's a good program, I added flatly. The air went strangely still. I felt a heavy gaze settle on the crown of my head. Marcus tells me you turned down the lead on it. Yes. I lowered my eyes and reached for a reason that fit American corporate logic. If I got involved, I'd eventually appear in the funding review. People would call it nepotism between the department and the Vance Fund. Better to avoid the conflict of interest. Conflict of interest? He took a step closer, his tall frame folding over me. So, not even your department chair knows what we are. You need to avoid it that badly? Eleanor, 3 years married, and you've never once meant to tell a single colleague that I'm your husband? Never? The memory hit me. 6 months earlier, at a department dinner, I'd borrowed courage from the wine and decided to tell a colleague I trusted that I was married. The instant I got out, my phone buzzed hard in my bag. It was Theo. Marcus says the Vance Fund is under special SEC scrutiny ahead of the IPO. Need you to keep our marriage strictly private at school. No nepotism or insider trading angle anyone could tie to the art program. Thank you. The words died on my tongue, drowned in the wine. All those years of silence weren't because I was ashamed, they were because I kept being forced to stand behind the enormous shadow of Vance Holdings. But facing his accusation, I didn't bother to explain. What good was a cold work text against my own hurt? A dead silence spread through the penthouse. Theo looked at the woman before him building a fortress wall, and somewhere in him a hidden insecurity stirred. He was 6 years older, his days nothing but dry numbers, the opposite of the young artists who circled her in Chelsea. Was she ashamed of a husband as dull as him? The defensiveness of a proud man snapped up like armor. He turned toward the stairs and laughed low. Right. A man in a gray suit could never be worth introducing to your dazzling little art world. I never heard the words at all. We fell silent, each of us cradling our own misunderstanding. And neither of us knew that silence was about to cost us an entire marriage. For the next month, the Cold War unfolded in the hush of the upper class. Our schedules missed each other completely. Even breakfast came out in 2 separate rounds. Then came the annual arts charity gala for New York's elite. Theo was invited as a diamond sponsor. I'd stepped in for a sick colleague coordinating the auction. 2 people who shared a home collided by accident in that lavish crowd. Chair Morgan steered Theo and a few board members my way, waving me over. Ellie, come say hello to CEO Vance. CEO Vance, this is Eleanor Lang, from our department, young, but a truly exceptional contemporary impressionist. Our eyes met. Remembering the wounded thing in his accusation, I felt something hook into my heart. I drew a breath and decided to break my own rule of self-protection. Mr. Morgan, actually, CEO Vance and I are acquainted. Theo cut me off, expression serene, ice cold. He'd defended first, afraid I'd say something that erased him, and chosen the cruelest way to save his own face. Chair Morgan blinked. Oh? You 2 know each other? I stood frozen, heart pounding. Then I heard the cold-blooded Wall Street man say, evenly, yes. Our families go back generations. We met through charity foundation boards. Our families go back. We met through charity boards. Not a wife, not a lover. He had used the most surgical phrasing of old money to erase this marriage entirely. I forced a smile. But watching his back recede into the crowd, all I felt was the drop into an ice cellar. Miss Lang, are you all right? A low, warm voice near my ear, and before I could see the man it belonged to, I'd tripped over the light cables coiled on the floor. Careful. With a shout, the heavy metal display stand crashed down. Its edge sliced a long cut into my calf, blood soaking the silk hem of my dress. Chaos erupted. Oh my God, first aid kit. Jace, my student assistant, reached me first. It's deep. I'm taking you to the hospital. The kid in the black hoodie hauled me up without a word. On instinct, I looked across the churning crowd toward the center of the room. Theo was leaning in, whiskey in hand, deep in some deal. None of the commotion reached him, as if nothing happening here had anything to do with him. Even though that person was his wife. Miss Lang, come on, You're losing a lot of blood. I pulled my gaze back. This time, I couldn't hold it in. The moment I turned away, one cold tear fell. The next morning, Theo finally noticed the bandage on my calf, the hitch in my step. He asked after me out of habit. "What happened to your leg?" "Last night at the gala, a ringing phone cut me off." He answered, and his face went instantly grave. Without waiting for me to finish, he was already striding for the foyer, reaching for his coat. Hanging up, he hurried on. "Last night about us. I've thought it through. If you're still embarrassed and want to keep it a secret, I'll respect that. I have to fly to London this afternoon to handle a crisis at the branch." "You'll be all right at home?" He asked it like a question, but his hand was already on the door. The cold rushed in and my wound throbbed. I nodded, my voice small enough for the wind to take. "It's fine. The housekeeper's here. Go." The oak door thudded shut. I sank into a chair and held my calf, the heat rising fast and blurring everything in front of me. 3 days later, Thea came by the studio. Rinsing brushes, she asked idly, "Ellie, are you moving to London with Theo at the end of the year too?" The fingers sorting my brushes went still. "What do you mean?" "The board assigned him to run the London branch for 2 years. The crisis over there is bad. They need the CEO on the ground." My heart clenched. When was that decided? A while ago? I heard a month back it went official internally last week. She caught her slip and clapped a hand over her mouth. "He didn't tell you?" The words cut off. The reek of turpentine turned my stomach. I had to grip the easel to stay upright. All this time, we still ate breakfast at the same table, still slept in the same bed. He'd had countless chances to tell me. He hadn't. Not to hide it, because it hadn't felt necessary. That indifference, natural as breathing, was more devastating than any screaming fight. In a 2-year plan, telling this wife had been a negligible variable in the equation of his life. I was a piece of expensive furniture in his penthouse. Go or stay, no one asks the furniture. Maybe that was the exact moment I decided to divorce him. Something in me quietly went dark. 3 hours later, I knew exactly what I had to do. At 4 a.m, the lock turned. Theo was back from JFK. I sat on the sofa, knees drawn up, and looked at him calmly. "Still up?" "Yes." "I was waiting for you." It was the first time I'd plainly admitted I was waiting for him. Theo sat across from me and loosened his cravat. "You're taking the London posting for 2 years?" I asked. "You know already?" He saw nothing wrong with it. "This move is make or break for the IPO. I have to go." "When do you leave?" "Flight's Wednesday, 72 hours. I nodded, forcing down the sourness behind my eyes. Watching the clock tick to 4:30, I made my last request. "Before you go, will you drive out to the Hamptons with me and watch the sunrise one more time?" Theo went still, unable to follow the sudden turn of my thoughts. But in the end, he nodded. The navigator glided east and stopped at an empty stretch of Hamptons Beach near the Vance family's summer estate. The late autumn wind off the water was cutting. We stood shoulder to shoulder on the rocks, exactly like that morning 3 years ago when we'd kissed on our honeymoon. I'd checked the forecast. Sunrise at 6:05. The seconds ticked up on Theo's Rolex Daytona. 5:59. 6. 6:1. Beside me, he checked his watch and glanced at the gray horizon. "Ellie, the fog's too thick. Statistically, there's no sun today." I didn't move, staring stubbornly at the sea. "Give it 5 more minutes. Maybe the wind clears it." He sighed and fixed his windmust collar, his voice level and calculating. "I have a video call with the European partners at 9:30. I need time to get back to Manhattan. There's no point waiting here. It's not worth wasting the morning on this. Not worth it." That was his eternal logic. The show wasn't worth it. My feelings weren't worth it. Even the last 5 minutes of this marriage weren't worth it. 6-5. No sun broke the water on schedule. Only that gray, dull sky, swallowing inch by inch the blue hour I'd once treasured. Theo. I turned to that face that was always calm, always right, and I felt lighter than I ever had. You're right. Some things, once the outcome is set, waiting really is pointless. You had me drive 2 hours out here just to tell me your philosophy? I stepped back, brushed the sand off my boots, and said it steadily. Of course not. What I wanted to tell you is, let's get divorced. I'll have my lawyer contact yours. The Atlantic slammed the rocks, filling the dead silence. He froze, a rare shock flickering in his eyes. I gave him no time to recover and gave myself no way back. The draft settlement went to your attorney's office this morning. If there's no dispute over the prenup terms, we can sign this afternoon before your flight. Eleanor. His voice held steady. You called me to the Hamptons in the middle of the night, made me watch for a sunrise, built up to it this long. Just to say that? Yes, I met his eyes. And this, isn't it worth one morning of your time? Theo pressed his lips flat, his tone offhand, as if dissecting a failed merger. Why? Because I missed the show? I explained the underwriters. Or because I rushed off at the gala without checking your leg? You could have just told me. I thought I was ready. But looking into those flat, unrippled eyes, my heart ached anyway. He didn't sound like a man discussing divorce with his wife. He sounded like a partner probing a fractured deal for its pain point. But there had never been just one or two pain points. It was nearly the whole of our married life. Forgotten anniversaries, dates outsourced to Marcus, me always at the bottom of the list. Mercifully, composure was Theo's religion. He didn't push me for a reason. If you've ever sat across from someone you loved and realized they were negotiating with you instead of loving you, you already know how this feels. Take 1 second, tap subscribe, and stay with me. Because what Eleanor does next is the part nobody in that room saw coming. Back in the walnut-paneled study, the air was suffocating. Theo finished reading the agreement my lawyer had faxed over. He steepled his hands under his chin. When did you decide? Last night. Last night? He laughed, furious, tapping the desk. You had a lawyer draft it, and only then told me? Yes. And didn't you decide on London, and only then tell me? Theo shut the folder and pushed it back. When I married you, I didn't take you for someone this childish. Don't say impulsive things like this again. I'll pretend I didn't hear it. I have to get to the airport. Theodore, I said his full name, each syllable clear. The prenup already spells it out. We have no shared assets to fight over. I just need your signature, and then we enter New York's 6-month mandatory waiting period. It won't delay your flight. Theo watched me, gauging how firm I was. He considered himself an exemplary husband by the standards of his world: financial security, social standing, no infidelity. And yet his little wife was clearly trying to flip the table. In seconds, he recovered the ruthless calm of a CEO, opened a drawer, took out another prepared folder, and slid it across. Fine. If you're this set on it, I'll sign. But Vance Holdings is about to file its S-1 with the SEC. I can't let any divorce news shake institutional confidence or drag down our valuation. Which means our records will be sealed. And for the next 6 months, when necessary, you'll still play Mrs. Vance in public. I tightened my grip. In that instant, I was certain how right this decision was. Pushed to the edge of pain, a person turns lucid instead. Theo, if you're giving orders as my husband, you're about to stop being my husband. If you're negotiating as a partner, then I'm under no obligation to perform that role for free. Theo lifted his head, cold eyes on mine. The wife who had always accommodated, was suddenly setting terms, and it caught him flat-footed. But negotiation was what he did best. Taking the company public is no joke, Ellie. Business is business. Business is business. I said it back, cold. So, what do I get? His expression didn't change. A consulting agreement. I'll retain you as the corporation's art advisor. In return, 2% in stock options ahead of the IPO, plus an NDA. Once we ring the bell on the NYSE, that stake is worth 9 figures at minimum. He tapped the folder. Reasonable? Reasonable. Generous? Even? So why did my throat feel like broken glass? So 3 years of being Mrs. Vance was, to him, a risk to be hedged. Fine. I closed my eyes and signed my name across the NDA. He thought 9 figures would buy my silence. He didn't know the thing he'd just signed was my emancipation papers. The day before he left for London, Theo, by routine, should have sent a representative to Columbia for the CSR review. But that day, for reasons he couldn't name, he came himself, even though they'd just signed the divorce. Even though he knew Eleanor was no longer the lead. At the meeting room door, through the gap, the faculty's low chatter reached him. Did you see Ellie? That leg the stand hit is still swollen, and she still Ubers herself to work. No sign of any family. Has anyone even seen the mystery husband? Finance guy, I hear. When she was in the ER for that pollen allergy, when she had her solo show nowhere to be found, living like a widow. She'd be better off divorced. Theo pushed the door open, the crease between his brows cut deep. When the meeting ended, he held Chair Morgan back. Mister, Morgan, is Eleanor's husband really that bad? Morgan looked at the CEO, remembering the met through charity boards line, and sighed. Ellie's good-natured, never complains. But since she married, it's like she lost her fire. Her thesis piece times echo from the deep times stunned the whole New York art scene. These last few years, her paintings have gone tight and faded, like the spark's been ground out of her. If I were her husband, I'd treat her like a treasure, not a decoration you leave at home. Theo said nothing, only walked to his car. Inside it, he tried to convince himself he'd delivered the optimal solution to a marriage. He owed her nothing. So why did those words leave him so unsettled? The night before his flight, Theo sat in his study. On impulse, he typed Eleanor Lang and Echo from the Deep into the search bar. An Old Times Art Review Times interview came up. On screen, the student Ellie wore a simple white silk shirt, hair loosely tied, eyes bright. She talked about color, about the loneliness of the ocean, confident, sharp, blazing with life. A completely different Eleanor from the silent, melancholy wife in his penthouse. For the first time since he'd signed the marriage license, Theo tried to understand the woman who carried his name. For the first time in 4 years, he saw my radiant soul. A shame it was the soul he'd snuffed out with his own hands. Theo had been in London nearly a month. The backlash I'd feared never came. Instead, I felt light, like I'd shed a heavy chain, and went back to my Brooklyn studio to mix hot, living color again. That night, over drinks at a quiet SoHo jazz bar, my best friend learned I'd begun divorcing the CEO of Vance Holdings and dropped the olive right out of her martini. Affair? Abuse? He's busy, but always respectful. Then why? I guess. Because he decided to move to London for 2 years. And by the time he told me, the plane ticket was already booked. She was speechless. But I knew what erodes a marriage is never the fights. It's the endless weightlessness of not being respected, not being treated as an equal. Better a clean grief than a slow numbness. I was pulling on my coat to leave when a commotion broke out at the bar's door. A boy in a hoodie, face bruised, was being held by 2 NYPD officers. I was horrified to recognize Jace, my student assistant. As they moved to load him into the car, I turned to a man leaning against the bar, the owner, by the look of him. Italian suit, no tie, an easy elegance, but eyes strangely keen. "Excuse me, I'm that boy's teacher. If he's booked, he'll be expelled. Could I see the footage?" He lifted his whiskey and smiled faintly. "Some drunk kept aiming his phone at you. The kid told him to delete the pictures, the guy cursed, and the kid broke his nose. A fight over a pretty woman. Thank you." No time to argue. I hurried out to promise the police I'd cover the drunk's medical bills so they wouldn't file. "Hey!" the man called after me, eyes crinkling. "I bought this whole bar last week. I'm not short your loose change." I paused a beat, then pushed through the door with no idea that wasn't our last conversation. Leaving the precinct, Jace hung his head, knuckles swollen red. I took him into a 24-hour CVS on the corner and sat him at the window counter. "Miss Lang, I'm not sorry. That creep was taking pictures of you. I'd do it again." I dabbed iodine on his wound. "You're 19, Jace. These hands are for holding a brush. No lowlife is worth trading your future and your gift for. Losing control isn't worth it." He went quiet, then looked up, stubborn. "But what if it's for someone you care about?" The memory screamed through me myself, back then, trading my youth and my talent for a man who didn't love me, left with nothing but numbness. "No," I said. Even then, no. At that moment, right across from the CVS, a black Maybach S-Class sat idling, window halfway down. Theo was in the back seat, just flown in from London for an emergency meeting, an unlit cigar between his fingers. From across the street, he watched the scene behind the bright glass. The wife, who had always been so cool with him, was bent forward, tender and absorbed, cleaning a wound on a young man's hand. The amber streetlight lit the undertow, churning in the Wall Street CEO's eyes. He sat in the dark of that Maybach, watching what he'd once held in his hands smile at another man. And that was only the beginning of everything he was about to lose. Watching Jace's cab pull away, I was about to call an Uber when the familiar Maybach rolled up. Theo stepped out, dark suit carrying the cold of the night. His eyes swept over me, then flicked toward the taxi that had just left. "Is this why you wanted to rush the divorce?" His voice was colder than the night dew. "Some kid who can't even afford a car to take you home? Excuse me? Your judgment's slipping, Ellie. A broke student using his fists to win a woman looking for a shortcut into the art world through you? You don't actually think he loves you?" I couldn't help it. I cut him off, cold. "And you? My billionaire husband, how much did you love me?" Theo's chest seized. For a moment, he had no answer. "He's just my student. But whoever he is, it's no longer any business of Mr. Vance's." I stepped back. "The waiting period is almost over. My lawyer files next week for the judge to sign the final judgment. Have a good trip to London." When the 6 months ended, a New York judge signed the divorce decree. My intersection with Theodore Vance should have ended there. But because of the consulting agreement and the pre-IPO NDA, I still had to appear beside him now and then at old money events. Mercifully, my brush had gone light again. Outside my teaching at Columbia, I buried myself in the Brooklyn studio, reworking my pieces, as if to reclaim the 3 years I'd lost. That same month, I went to see Evenig's solo show at a private gallery in Chelsea. Evenig was a master of landscape oils, the biggest influence on my wild early style, a recluse on the island of Trinidad, who almost never exhibited. No one knew why he'd suddenly brought his work to New York. As I stood, lost, before one painting, a low, warm voice sounded beside me. "We meet again, Miss Lang." I turned the man from the bar. Today, his elegance was reined in by a crisp suit. "I don't recall introducing myself to you," I said, thrown. He turned his eyes to the painting in front of me. "I'm an admirer of time's echo from the deep. Seeing my shock, he smiled. I bought that piece out of your thesis show. It's passed through a few collectors since, and it's worth dozens of times what it was. I've always wondered why your style changed so much after it. Safer. Tighter. The question struck the softest spot in me. He offered his hand, courteous. Julian Hayes, art dealer and brokerage director for SIA, headquartered in Zurich. We're alumni. I was 2 years ahead of you. After that show, Julian and I met more often, sometimes to talk about art, sometimes to hunt inspiration in old galleries. He was the one who threw himself entirely into bringing my canvas back to life. But just as things were easing, an email from Vance Holdings dragged me back into the old swamp. The IPO had entered its decisive roadshow phase. To reassure institutional investors, the board needed a flawless investor gala, and under the consulting agreement, art advisor Eleanor Lang was required to appear beside Theodore Vance as the model Mrs. Vance. I gripped my phone. Free on paper, and yet my signature from 6 months ago was hauling me back onto the old stage. The night of the gala, I wore the gown the stylist had chosen, stood beside Theo before 100 lenses, and smiled at the right angle. He introduced me to the investors in the rehearsed tone. My wife, the corporation's art advisor. Every word perfect, every word hollow. What I didn't expect was Julian, there as an invited collector. From across the hall, he watched me take the arm of the man who had once made me go dark. He didn't approach. He only raised his glass and tilted his head toward me, a look at once understanding and patient. When the party broke up, Julian waited for me in the outer hall and said just one thing. You don't owe me an explanation. I know what a signature costs. But Ellie, a contract can borrow your name. It can't borrow you. Then he draped his coat over my shoulders and saw me to my car. That night I understood the difference between a man who uses status to possess and one who uses patience to wait. 6 months on, Theo seemed to have changed a little. He learned to text me himself instead of routing it through Marcus. When a waiter poured me ice water at some benefit, he'd cover the rim with his hand and murmur, "Warm water, please, her stomach's sensitive." But some things, learned too late, are still too late. Because on a night thick with snow in Manhattan, after dinner at a French restaurant, Julian instinctively opened one side of his coat, wrapping me against the driving snow as he hurried me into the car. Neon streaked past the glass, and he said, out of nowhere, "Ellie, be with me." I forced down my racing heart. You once asked why my style changed. Evening wandered his whole life, so his work carries solitude. Me, I lost my wildness and put on restraint. Because back then I was married. And I wasted my love on a strategic marriage that never once answered back. I know, Julian said, gaze deep and serious. Then he decided to say the thing he'd buried a long time. Ellie, the man the family set you up with at that first introduction, should have been me. I've been in love with you since I bought Time's Echo from the deep. But I was stuck on an unbreakable schedule in Zurich, and Theo Vance rearranged his calendar to meet you 2 days early. After that, you settled on him. Bringing Evening to New York was, me, too, a bet that if he showed, you'd come, and I could finally meet you again, out in the open. He looked straight into my eyes. So this time, I refuse to leave it to fate. I don't care about your past. Just give me one chance. The air froze. A long moment later, I answered softly, yes. Julian pulled me in and held me so tight, it was as if he wanted to press me into his skin. Someone once said the highest form of love is aching for the other person. This time, I wanted to love this man well. 2 years later, Vance Holdings rang the bell on the NYSE. The IPO landed loud, lifting the Vance fortune to a new height. And with it, the 2% in stock options in my hands became a vast liquid number. My run as Mrs. Vance was over The contract ended the day the stock went public. That Valentine's night, Theo came back from Davos and once again found a reason to want me at the company celebration. I declined. His face shifted. Why? Are you unwell? I shook my head and returned the Cartier box to his hand. Because I'm in love. I don't want to keep making myself feel small, and I don't want my man to feel small either. At those words, Theo's mind went to static. In London, he'd tried to learn to be a husband. He'd carried that intention home whole to remarry me. A long while later, he asked, dry, why? I've changed. You've seen it. And haven't I treated you well? Tell me then, where did you treat me well? I asked back, calm. Theo faltered, then began listing assets, the privileges the Vance name conferred. Fine, let me rephrase. I cut in. What's my shoe size? My favorite color? What am I allergic to? Theo went silent. He knew it was a test, and he was utterly blank. Last year's anniversary gift, what was it? Silence again. I turned to Marcus, the loyal EA standing not far off. Marcus, reminds CEO Vance. Marcus glanced at his boss, got the nod, and cleared his throat. Ma'am, you're a size 6.5. Last year was the HW Sunflowers necklace, the year before an orange Togo Hermes Birkin, the year before that a Bentley Continental. The first Valentine's was roses. Enough, Theo barked. And as the word left him, he froze. Right, you know it too. Are you my husband, or is Marcus? I smiled thin. Have you ever seen me wear luxury jewelry? You probably don't even know I have a severe pollen allergy, which is why every Valentine's your assistant filled my gallery with 1,000 roses. Marcus dropped his eyes to the floor. Theo, admit it. You needed a perfect wife as a screen for the Vance IPO. Who she was, what she felt, never mattered. He stood frozen. The gentle, yielding wife of before now looked straight at him, no love left, not even resentment. Only absolute indifference. By the time Theo brought his cold and his regret home to Greenwich, night had fully fallen. In the walnut-paneled study, Mrs. Vance, his mother, genuine old money, sat at an antique desk writing thank you cards with a fountain pen. You're back? The housekeeper carried out a fresh apple pie. Where's Ellie? I made the apple pie she loves. The fingers, unbuttoning his coat, stopped. She's busy. Mrs. Vance's pen paused, ink blooming into a black dot. She set it down. How long do you plan to hide it? The girl has already moved on. Theo asked the thing that gnawed at him most. Mother, I don't understand. You and father were a strategic alliance too. He was busy, cold. Why were the two of you solid as rock, and Ellie and I weren't? Mrs. Vance sipped her Earl Grey, pity in her eyes. Theo, do you think you can compare yourself to your father? He was cold, but he had the ultimate anchor. When you were 2, I went into acute kidney failure. Your father walked out of a takeover in Europe and flew home that night. His match to me was so miraculous that half of this life is his gift. She looked at her stunned son. In the practical marriages of our world, if you don't have a defining act of loyalty at the edge of life and death, then you build the anchor with daily care, detail by detail. Look at yourself. You had no life or death anchor, and you couldn't be bothered with the details. You copied your father's cold shell without understanding the core inside it, a marriage that imitates the form and stays hollow. That you've come to this, you brought on yourself. Chasing an ex-wife who doesn't know her own limits is never easy. Even a chance encounter reads as clinging. Still, when Columbia held its annual curator's reception, Theo had someone secure him an invitation. He arrived late, on purpose. But this time I wasn't running the event. I was there as Julian Hayes's girlfriend. Julian leaned in to hear me and, perfectly naturally, raised a hand to intercept a passing waiter's tray before it reached me. I held his arm, laughing bright as a rose just opening. An Eleanor like that, Theo had never seen. God, Ellie, now I get why you hid your boyfriend, a colleague teased. Wait, I thought CEO Vance said you two met through charity boards? Julian smiled, an arm around my waist, and took every misunderstanding onto himself. We kept it private to protect Ellie from the noise. I apologize for the confusion. He lifted his champagne. It won't be that way from now on. Not far off, Theo's face went pale. What right did that art dealer have to apologize in his place? He wanted to charge over and shout, "You're all mistaken, I'm her ex-husband." But it was his own mouth, years ago, that had severed this to avoid a conflict of interest. After the guests thinned, Julian and Theo met on the balcony, looking down at the blazing lights of Manhattan. I've seen people cosplay as artists, Theo sneered, not hiding his hostility. First time I've seen a man cosplay as someone else's husband. Julian raised a brow, calm. What a coincidence. I have something to ask you, Mr. Vance. I'm visiting Ellie's parents in Boston this weekend. You were their son-in-law for 3 years, so surely you know her elders' tastes. Should I bring Cohiba cigars or a limited edition Macallan? The night wind carried a suffocating silence. Theo, always in control, gripped his glass until his knuckles went white. He said nothing, because he couldn't. In 3 years, the times he'd visited his in-laws could be counted on one hand. Marcus had handled all of it. You don't have to answer, Julian said, faint, not hiding his pity. I forgot, mister. Vance is busy with billion-dollar deals. No time even to look at his wife's wound. Still, thank you for handing this treasure over. I thought that morning in the Hamptons was the end. But Theodore Vance still had one last thing to lose, and this time it was his own pride. A few days later, Theo's phone rang. It was Thea. Theo, go grab some things from the Brooklyn studio for me. There's a batch of Ellie's old paintings here. She told me to just toss them, but I can't. Toss them? Theo drove to Brooklyn. Opening the storage room, he stopped short. Dozens of frames, stacked neat under a thin sheet. You'd never guess, Thea murmured. But she used to love you this much. A painter only paints what she's obsessed with, and under her brush, it's all you. Theo's hand trembled as he drew back the sheet. His pupils contracted. 5:42 a.m. On the vast canvas, deep blue spread wide. The man in it was only a blurred back, yet lit with impossible tenderness. He ran his fingers along the inner edge of the stretcher bar and found a small line in black Sharpie, 5:42 a.m., the Hamptons. Theo said he wished this moment would stand still. So did I. It was the one faintly romantic thing he'd said in passing on their honeymoon and forgotten by the next day. She had treated it as a vow, hidden it behind the painting. He pulled back the others. His back working in the study. His back tying a tie. In not one had he turned to face her. Regret buried him like an avalanche. 2 years after the divorce, he finally understood how quietly his wife had loved him, how all those years she had faced that indifferent back and painted her own loneliness over and over. 2 weeks later, Theo used all his power to book out a Chelsea gallery and reconstruct the Times' 5:42 a.m. Times show exactly as it had been. He sent me a polite text. Thea moved studios. I organized your old paintings. If you're free next Tuesday, come to Chelsea to collect them. The day of the show, Theo canceled every meeting, put on the suit from 3 years ago, and stood in the middle of the gallery, waiting. 2 in the afternoon. 4. 6. The door stayed shut. The spotlight burned down on the painting. Anticipation gave way, inch by inch, to disappointment. Was this what Ellie had felt back then? At 8, the gallery closed. Not one missed call. Theo sank onto the sofa and scrolled his phone. His fingers stopped on a photo I'd just posted. In it, I wore a simple white dress, lily of the valley in my hands, laughing beside Julian in front of City Hall. The caption was 2 words, just married. Late that night, the Maybach screeched to a stop outside my building. Just as I'd seen a friend out and moved to close the door, a firm hand stopped it. Theo stood there, suit rumpled, eyes bloodshot, reeking of cigar smoke. He looked at the faint mark on my collarbone, and the Wall Street CEO's control shattered. He didn't lunge, but his words ran loose, casting off all his pride. You really let him touch you? We're legally married, I said, calm like a stranger. You drove here in the middle of the night just to ask that? I don't believe it. His voice went hoarse, abject to the point of madness. I saw those paintings. You loved me that much. I know I was wrong. I owe you 1,000 apologies. Let me make it up to you. He choked out the most absurd offer of his life. If you can't leave him, I can accept that. I don't need the title. Just let me see you sometimes. Let me be the man behind the curtain. Please? I blinked, indifferent to the point of cruelty. Theo, do you hear yourself? The proud CEO of Vance Holdings begging to be the other man? My absolute calm terrified him more than hatred ever could. You think those paintings were love? No. They were the wreckage of a woman you wrung dry. You're not well right now. Please go home. The words hit him like ice water, humiliation scorching his ears. He stepped back, leaned against the doorframe, and bowed his head. A long while later, he turned and walked into the dark hallway. At the bend in the hall, Theo came face to face with Julian, just off the elevator, keys turning idly in his hand, entirely at ease. Thank you for the invitation, mister. Vance, Julian said, mild, without a single barb, and yet the damage landed at full force. Ellie actually wanted to wait a few more months. But when she saw you'd gone to the trouble of rebuilding the old show, she softened. She didn't want me to worry, so this morning we went to City Hall and made it official to put my mind at ease. Julian wasted no more words, stepping past Theo to my door where I stood waiting. Julian, what took you so long? I smiled. The CVS downstairs was out of the ginger tea you like. I had to walk 2 more blocks. Your stomach's been cold. He smiled softly, lifting a plastic bag with a few small boxes peeking out. He settled the shawl back over my shoulders against the draft, then slid an arm around my waist and pushed the door open. The oak door thudded shut, cutting off Theo's despairing gaze, entirely the final period on every loose thread of the past. After we married, I slowly realized I'd been sweetly deceived. Julian's title at SIA was just a passion project. He was, in fact, the heir to the Hayes family, a Boston banking dynasty, who worked out of real love for art, and maybe because he'd fallen for a painter a very long time ago. But the thing that told me I'd chosen right this time wasn't his pedigree. It was the small details, the kind I once thought no one bothered to notice. Julian knew I wore a size 6.5 and bought soft-soled shoes so I could stand all day without aching. He knew about my pollen allergy, so our home held only lily of the valley never arose. He knew my stomach was weak, so his coat pocket always held ginger tea. He had a craftsman rebuild my studio chair with a lumbar cushion because he'd noticed I painted late into the night. No life or death transplant. No ultimate anchor. Just a man who gathered up small pieces of me every day and built them into something to lean on. I used to think love was a single radiant moment, like dawn at 5:42. Now I understand. Love is 1,000 ordinary mornings, when someone takes the trouble to learn you by heart, not to own you, but so you can live a little lighter. It is what Mrs. Vance had said all along. Marriage is the accumulation of safety, built from the smallest details. And maybe the worth of a person was never the price someone else set on them, but the price they set on themselves. A marriage rarely dies from one loud betrayal. It dies quietly, in 1,000 mornings of not being seen. 1,000 times your name is moved to the line marked unnecessary. And love, real love, was never the size of the diamond a man could buy. It was whether he ever bothered to learn that you take your water warm, that lilies make you cry, that there's a shade of the sky only one person ever stood beside you to watch. If you have ever been the one who loved louder, who waited longer, who made yourself smaller so someone important could feel tall, I hope you'll remember this. Where a marriage begins does not decide where you end. And nobody, not a husband, not a contract, not $1 billion, has the right to price you lower than the price you set on yourself. Here's what I want you to sit with tonight. Have you ever had someone finally understand your worth only after you'd already walked out the door, long after they'd lost the right to ask you to stay? Because that's the cruelest math of a cold love. They only add you up after they've lost you. So, if this story found you, leave one word below, just one, and tell me about the moment you stopped waiting to be seen and started seeing yourself. I read every one. And if there's someone out there still shrinking themselves for a person who won't look up, send them this video. Let them know their worth was never up for negotiation. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe. I'll see you at the next one.